Welcome, everyone. What can you learn from 150 experiments conducted with a team of scientists and focused specifically on the call to action? Think about that for a moment. As you're thinking about it, I want to take you forward to an experiment, test protocol 1785. Large global media company. I've got a question for you. It's an easy one to answer, but it's not an easy one to answer right. So there you have 5 calls to action. All of these tested. Start free trial. Try now. Start here. Get started. Get started now. You'll notice, first of all, there's a significant overlap. And you might even wonder, will this information make that big a difference? Because the only thing that's changing is the wording on the button. So here's what I'm asking you to do. We are not live today. We normally are, but we are still setting up our studio. And so we're going to stay with the recording because we don't have the upload speeds that we need yet at the studio. And yet, you can take a moment and pick which one of these you think will produce the highest conversion rate. Treatment 1, treatment 2, treatment 3, treatment 4, or treatment 5. As you're thinking about that, I will share the results for you. Which one do you think was worst and which one do you think is best? Pick the worst one, all right? And then I'm going to show you the one that is worst and best in order. There they are. Get started now was 52% more effective than start free trial. Now, if you've got any experience in marketing, you should be perplexed by that result. Indeed, as we look at them in order, there's some observations we can make, and from these observations, we can learn something today that will truly help us. Now, I have been teaching since we set up this behavioral research laboratory almost 30 years ago, conducting research and teaching. But today's topic is one of those rare topics that is so intensely actionable that if you will invest a few minutes with me, you can walk away with something very specific. You can go change very easily, without much development, without much design support, and you may see a meaningful improvement in your results. Now, as I help you think about that, let's look at the top 2 and analyze them. We're looking for patterns. We're looking for clues. You need to think like a detective with me for just a moment. Get started now. Start free trial. You see there's a big difference in performance, and yet there are some observations worth pointing out. Start free trial is 11% less effective per this experiment. Both get and now are used in the calls to action that had lower CTRs. If you were to look at that long list, many of the words in these buttons that were part of the winning sort of top 2 were used in the buttons that lost. Indeed, the notion of starting is presented in both calls to action. And then, curiously enough, you have to ask this question. Flint, you say you've often talked about a button being value positive, that it has its own independent process level value proposition, because this is true. But really, isn't a free trial more valuable than, the other button that is, causing a negative impact on conversion? I don't understand. How does free trial hurt conversion? Getting started? Getting started in what? Is that as valuable in terms of perception? As you think about that, let me take you to more context. The calls to action in this test were attempting to move the prospect to try a collection of web and mobile-based apps. Now, that's important, and we'll talk about why that's important as this unfolds. In addition, you might think, well, okay, so that's the context. How does that context inform how I should think about my call to action? Well, here's a hypothesis that we had. The notion of free trial can also have not just value, but implied friction or implied anxiety. We often talk about friction and anxiety, but we don't understand the power of this concept implied. It's interesting in the web that sometimes when you fix one problem, you create a larger one. And what we're thinking about right now are some moves that are taking place in pixels and zeros and ones that seem like changes to a page, but they're actually changes to a signal set that impacts the mind. When there's a whole collection of apps and you offer a free trial, first of all, there's confusion because you're talking about the plural and you're talking about the singular in the same sentence. And then more than that, when you think about it, some free trials, particularly in contexts like this, some of these free trials engage, you do a download and you can't get fully functioning versions. Or you have to wait for an email to come and finally help you unlock the program. Or in some situations, you actually have to have a salesperson talk to you before you can use the free trial. All of these provide sources of potential anxiety, and that anxiety can be implied depending on how we communicate in the context of the page. So beware of this implied condition of friction and anxiety. And then more importantly, think about what other cognitive conditions could be happening on the page that I'm missing. I think I'm fixing a problem, adding value, and I'm actually creating a bigger problem. It's an issue that I see over and over again in optimization, particularly as that veneer level of understanding becomes more common in the marketplace. We all think we know more than we do. Human mind's a mystery. Friction isn't as simple as we sometimes think. It is certainly a lot more than length-oriented. We can talk about that in a different context. But for now, I'd like to begin teaching some key principles, and then I want to work with you through 6 of these negative conditions that you need to guard against. And by looking for these 6 in your own work, you'll be able to see, wait a second, I could perhaps improve this button and perhaps this conversion rate. So here's the first point, and that is that we have to understand the call to action. It's not a button. It's not even, made of the materials of a button. It is, again, the illusion, zeros, ones, pixels, binary, something being turned on, a signal set. And so it is actually more than a thing. It is a moment in time. And when you recognize that, you have to realize that when you ask me to do something, what you ask me to do is very important. But when you ask me to do it can have more bearing on whether I choose to comply or not. And in the timing issue, if I don't understand context and if I don't see the call to action as a critical moment in a series of ascending moments connected to micro yeses that lead to the macro yes that helps me become a customer, if you don't see it in that context, it's very difficult to understand whether or not you're asking at the right time or if you're asking for too much too soon. I have been married 33 years. And I can promise you the first moment, that moment when I met the woman who became my wife, had I asked for too much too soon, there probably wouldn't have been a marriage at all. I have 3 children, and those children might not exist as I know them today if I hadn't got my timing right. It actually took me 1 year, 1 week, and 1 day from the moment I met her to approach the exact right time, to ask the exact right question, the macro yes that produced a long-term relationship, 33 years and 3 children. Had I walked up to my wife and asked for, let's say, the first time, and she wasn't my wife then, obviously, she's a perfect stranger, and had I walked up to her and asked her where she'd like to spend the long weekend, I'd have probably gotten slapped. Or I could have walked up to her, and please don't get all mad at me, I'm not trying to be offensive, but if I'd have walked up to her and kissed her full on the lips, she's an old school Southern belle, she'd have had none of that. Indeed, so many times we do this because we think we're keeping the call to action above the fold. One of the stupidest things you can do is ask too soon because of a truism you heard somebody mutter at some conference somewhere. There is no fold. And the call to action needs to happen at the right time, not on the basis of a cliched pseudo principle that has no research basis. So that's the first point. Here's the second. If we only view calls to action in a vacuum, apart from the sort of the full relational context, just like this unfolding relationship of growing trust that occurred in the year, week, and a day that I dated. In fact, it's old school. In the old days, we called it courted. That I courted the girl who eventually said yes and changed my life. If we only view calls to action in a vacuum and our marketing collateral can produce these unintended cognitive conditions that hurt us, we have more instinct, we're more self-aware when it comes to our personal relationships than it is with our marketing. The more we market, the less we become a consumer, the less we understand what it feels like to be on the other side. We speak to people in language and with words and with braggadocious claims that we would never use in real life. So, here's where we're going today. We took 150 of our experiments. We have the largest library in the world. Over 20,000 experiments we've conducted, treatments we've tested. We took 40-plus brand-side marketer case studies, 750 pages of just test data, 300 creative samples, and we analyzed them, focusing on the call to action. In doing this, we came up with 6 cognitive conditions, dangerous conditions that can hurt us. And I want you to think with me today as if I were a doctor coming alongside of you to diagnose a condition, and then prescribe a potential solution, which is really the doctor's hypothesis for how to address your illness. So in this case, we're going to work through all 6 of these, probably 3 today and 3 in the follow-up. And we're going to learn how to apply, how to detect, how to diagnose, and prescribe what we're learning today in such a way as to change our results. So let's begin with the first one, internal detachment. Think of it like a medical condition. And I'm going to give you a pretty vigorous definition. It's a state of general apathy or disinterest because the messaging up to this point has not been relevant enough. It doesn't have enough urgency or importance. And so the cluster of pixels that produces my CTA is ineffective. The root cause of this, you can see as you watch with me on the slides, is commonly caused by a lack of empathy regarding the customer's motivation or an attempt to focus too narrowly on a particular offer, and in doing so, we exclude all these other people, and in doing this, we become irrelevant to them, which is fine if there's enough of these, but there may not be, and so you end up leading with the wrong message. Now, signs and symptoms. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is reduce all your CTAs to 1, but it better be the right one. So many times the reason we proliferate CTAs is because we're not sure which one is actually going to work. That's the wrong reason to have many of these on your page. We'll come back to that later. Another sign or symptom is when the text of your CTA is too specific. But don't get hung there because we have the same problem when it's too general. If it's value neutral, not providing me with any plus side, to me, value neutral is identical to value negative. It's not positive, we'll call it negative. I don't even know if I trust the condition neutral, although it's here formally in our study. Now, this is very abstract, so let's get practical. The audience submitted this page. This is with a massive defense contractor who also provides some high-tech equipment in the public. I've used their equipment, their technology, they're amazing. I've taught at their events, they've been to our events. And there's the call to action to learn more about, and then it names the biomedical, others infusion device analysis, click here. Now, how good is that? Audience, how would you improve that? Stop for a moment, because if you're just listening to me, you're probably not learning. You've got to engage with me. You've got to engage your mind and participate. So take a moment, think about that and say, what would you do to improve that? Forget the number of form fields. We're not talking about friction. We're just talking about the call to action. How would you improve it? Well, as you think about it, remember this. Intensify. This is a treatment now. You'll notice our little icon. We talked about a problem. Now we're talking about the solution. Here's ways to fix that. And I'm going to give you a principle, and often I'm going to illustrate it from one of the case studies so you can see it in action, so you can cash it in, so this isn't too academic. Number 1, intensify the explicit or implicit value in the button text. See this? Subscribe now. That subscription actually gives them the right to an upgrade. What they want is the upgrade. Here's a button that says upgrade now. This is from a test. This might surprise you, but the simple switch from one to the other produces a 75% increase in conversion. And we would call that a variable cluster. I teach that in our testing, and I'll get into it later. But one of the most important ways to conduct smart testing is using variable clusters. Here's another way to treat this problem. Select a completely different offer that is more closely matched to your customer's interest, tighter, right on the epicenter of what they want. So get started now. Now we just saw get started now worked. We ran a test. And when we ran it, we got a stronger result. Now we're going to use it and show you another one, estimate my monthly payment. This is a completely different approach, same audience. But it's zeroed in on what matters most to that person at that moment. What does that produce? Well, it produces a 125% increase in conversion. Think about that. What really happened here? Basic human nature. I don't study anything that I hope won't be valid 1,000 years from now and that I believe was valid 1,000 years ago. I don't care about trends and Facebook and all of those things. Those are important. We can use them. Instagram, Facebook, and all the latest opportunities to communicate with people in new ways. All of those things change, but human nature stays the same. And all that you've done here is you've zeroed in on what matters the most, and so you stimulated a stronger response. Here's a third treatment for this problem. Add additional calls to action that will let you reach a different type. Now, this can get you in trouble. I see this done wrong 99, you hear me? 99% of the time it's done wrong. But sometimes just adding a call to action for a different segment, especially if it's not equally weighted, if it's emphasized differently, and if it appears different and it doesn't produce an unintended consequence, that is confusion. If it's clear and you have more than one segment, there's a way to work. Now, if you get it wrong, you'll hurt conversion. I'm going to take a classic example because this is old. I want to use an old one. Sometimes we use these classics because our library goes back for years, and the classics allow me to show you more content or speak about them in ways I couldn't because I wouldn't want to harm the business's IP, for instance. Here's the button at the bottom, get pricing information. Now, what do you think the difference of that is? So you got two of these, but doing it that way allowed me to reach a whole group of people I was missing with the request more information. What did that produce in results? 229% more leads, qualified leads. That's powerful. You say, but that wasn't that big a change. No, it was just some few pixels. But I don't believe in optimizing web pages. You've heard me say this for decades. We optimize the sequence of thought. We optimize what's happening in the mind. And that's why a small change can have a huge impact. So we've covered one of 6 of these conditions. This is a quote from the book some of you have purchased. Specificity converts. Indeed, for any reasonable sample size, the specific offer to the specific person will outperform the general offer to the general persons. That brings me to the next problem, shock. NS shock, we sometimes call it, non-sequential shock. Don't get trapped in the fancy term. I'm going to spell it out and I'm going to illustrate it for you, all right? The definition officially, it's a state of surprise, a negative surprise, when we improperly sequence an ask. The best illustration of this would be the one I talked about earlier. Had I walked up to my wife, showed her a picture of my house and asked her how many children she wanted, that ask would have been too soon. She wasn't my wife at that point, obviously, she's a stranger, and it would have caused non-sequential shock. And no doubt I would have got a shocking reply. On the other hand, let's look at it more deeply. Here's the root cause. It's commonly caused by the sort of lethal assumption that the customer is further along in the sequence of thought than they really are. We often think they're here, and this is a series of micro yeses, but they're only here. And so we ask for something here. They're not ready to reply yet, and that means the answer is no. Signs and symptoms, if your CTA asks for a significant commitment rather than the natural next step, that's a sign of a problem. If the CTA is positioned on page extremities, top, bottom, or sides, it should be at the right time, but is it far enough deep into the mental conversation to connect with what they want next? The CTA produces a high degree of friction, and you can see that, like the form fields, etc., and I'm going to illustrate. So where does the call to action fall in the thought sequence on this old classic example? Some of these are going to be mobile, some of these will be desktop. Right now, I just want you to get a sense. Where is it? So it's over on the side, and somebody submitted this page, and it's ugly, but it's real. People are trying to get a result. What can you do to improve it? Well, let's go back. Aligning the call to action more logically to the sequence of thought. In this one, we're way over on this side, and it's speaking to me at the same time as the message on the center is, and it's asking the wrong thing too soon before I absorbed enough of the right content. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. But for now, align the CTA more logically to the sequence of thought. Here's an example from a classic case study. Here's where we put it, not up there, order now, but down here, continue to step 2. And the result is 122%. That's an example. Here's another key. Another way to treat that condition. Relocate the CTA to different places on the page, more appropriate to the chronology of the mind. Move so that you synchronize the geography of the page with the chronology of the mind. So from this, the CTA is now moved to the top of this page because they're already further along in the sequence of thought. What does that produce? 87% increase in the conversion rate. In this case, moving it up was the right thing to do. In some cases, moving it down is the right thing to do. But if you say, well, I'm confused, how do I know which one it is? It's by learning what's happening in their mind, which is, by the way, the whole point of testing. Testing is not about getting a lift. You'll get the lift if you can understand what's happening in the mind. The learning is more important than the initial lift. Indeed, the whole point of testing is to build a predictable model that helps you understand how your customer makes decisions. Now, you think about that. This one is a roll-up. The guy who ran this company also ran for president. And it's a surprising case study because you're going to see that we move the call to action from the top all the way to the bottom. And then we added more copy. And I can hear you now. Wait. Long copy. Long copy is not the problem. Long copy is never the problem. Confusion is the problem. If you don't give me enough copy, and then I don't know enough to make the right decision, I'm not going to make it. If you give me too much copy, I have the same problem. Enough copy is the amount of copy it takes to establish with clarity sufficient value to outweigh the perceived cost. Now, as you think about that, we move this all the way down. And yet, this page outperforms this page in lead generation or patient inquiries by 220%. And listen, that's validated through a whole team of scientists. That's a legitimate increase that came from doing something counterintuitive. And this is why we need to understand this other potential threat. Here's another. Relocating the CTA to previous or subsequent pages. Moving it to the right time in the journey is an important way to improve. So here, we broke it into 2 and tightened up the experience completely. And you could say, wait a second, you created friction. You made 2 pages where there was 1. Yeah, we did. But there was implied friction on this left-hand side. And it felt like there was so much you needed to do that when you shifted to the first piece to set up your free account, and I would change that headline, you can improve these, all of these can be improved. It looked very simple. And then once you clicked on Get Free Access, you were already invested, committed, and you could see there was only a few more form fields. And in this way, we eased you through the process. You could say, well, but that would just frustrate me. You're probably the worst example to use when it comes to writing your copy. You're a professional marketer. You've got to be a professional, an amateur consumer. You got to tap into that part inside of you if you're going to be able to see your page through their eyes. In this case, this shift produced a 108% increase in conversion. Now, that would have worked, especially in a mobile environment done properly. So keep thinking, but get the underlying principle. Here's another example from this. It's on a completely separate page. This goes against everything you would expect, and frankly, in many cases, everything that I see in most tests, and yet 120% in conversion. I was teaching this past week at Royal Bank of Canada. And by the way, I shout out to Teledyne. Our team was in France doing a quick win intensive this week in France. Austin McCraw, who works in my organization, right out of college, he's been with me since he graduated from college, is doing his PhD at Cambridge. I'm very proud of him. He went over and taught the quick win intensive, and we had a remarkable time with the Teledyne team. I was in Canada teaching at Royal Bank, and we had all of their executives, and then, I don't know, 170 marketers gathered. We've been working with them for years, and I only bring it up to say this. Somebody asked me a smart question. They said, so am I to take what you put on the screen and taught today as this is a rule, always do this? Or is this a principle or an idea for a test? And he was very smart, and he was trying to parse it. I want to say to you what I said to him. Everything I say here is about you developing a more robust hypothesis. It needs to be tested to be proven. There are exceptions to everything that I'm saying. The principles around people are the most reliable, but the application of those principles can vary. We just scheduled a quick win intensive with a group in Israel today. And I think it just happened like a few moments ago. And I know that we're going to help them drive a result. But their pages, if they were in Hebrew, and I'm not saying they are, but if their pages are in Hebrew, they're going to read from right to left. Now, friction when you're reading from right to left will look very different. The same thing you could be said of certain dialects in Chinese. Left to right, right to left. The principle of human nature, the psychological resistance is the same, but the application is different in different cultures. And frankly, with Expedia, we've been testing all over the world, many languages. And we find that human nature is the same, but interpretation changes in circumstances. I could give you many examples, but the good news for you is what we're learning here applies everywhere I've ever seen, all over the world, in many different languages and geographies and cultures. But you've got to learn to apply it in your circumstances. So here's the point. There are two flawed asks that will mitigate the power of our message. Asking the wrong person. We do this all day long. We waste our energy on the wrong people, our marketing energy. Or an ask at the wrong time. So we finally get the right person, but we still ask them at the wrong time. Doing the right thing is more important than doing the thing right. Did you hear that? Doing the right thing is more important than doing the thing right. The marketer must deliver the right message to the right prospect at the right time, or it is no longer the right message. Now, as you think about that with me, I want to take you to a checklist. I don't know how to get this to you, but we'll try to create a download where you can download this checklist for these first 2 points. This is taking sort of the things I've been teaching so far and giving you something very practical you can hold up against your pages and say, how do I stack up against this criterion? I'm going to bring you to my third and final point for today, and then we're going to continue teaching this in the next session. This is cognitive condition number 3. This is a danger to the effectiveness of your call to action. It's called compositional paralysis. And frankly, it's a state of confusion that halts the velocity, the forward momentum of the prospect. And this often happens when we give them too many choices. Now, I'm a fan of Daniel Kahneman, and I think he should have got the Nobel Prize in economics, and Amos Tversky, who deserves a great deal of credit for the same. And some of this new breed of positive psychologists who are studying biases, they have lots of interesting information to provide. And I could tell you a cool story about a test that was done with a variety of flavors of jam. But our time's limited, so I just want to make this point. If you give me too many options, you slow down my choice momentum. And when you slow me down, it's harder to get me moving again, and conversion suffers. One of the earliest and important changes that we made in our work in the beginning days of the behavioral research in our lab was to simplify choices. It's long before Steve came along with the one-button iPod, but he had the right idea. The root cause is an attempt to accomplish too many company objectives with a single conversation. Think of each page as a conversation that reveals the signal sets that impact the thinking. All right? And here are some of the signs and symptoms. When the call to action is not visually distinct from the rest of the page, hard to find, doesn't stand out, doesn't pop. When there's a high degree of difficulty-oriented friction, we teach that's a special kind of friction. And when the call to action does not fall naturally into the main eye path of the offer. You can probably put Marketing Sherpa or MECLABS and then search difficulty-oriented friction and get articles that will come and help you with that. For now, I want to show you another audience-submitted page. How easy is it to suggest the calls to action on this page? Ask you a different one. Where is the call to action on this page? If you're not sure, I don't blame you. I can tell you this, reducing the CTAs and simplifying them could have a powerful impact on this page. Let's look at an example from this, and that's already improved, to this. Now, you might say, yeah, but I'm giving them a choice. Yeah, but they got 4 evenly weighted choices. Yes, there's some yellow, but the buttons are still evenly weighted. The yellow really doesn't make it easier for me. And instead, it almost offends me with implied friction. You know what I feel like? I feel like you're trying to make me to buy the most expensive item. I feel like you're just hammering me with that. And why would I when those checks are all equal across all 3? The only difference is actually the month. That is the case of a chart that isn't needed. That's the case of a chart that's designed to be a closing device, and it feels like a closing device that's designed to manipulate me in a negative way. Go away. I'm not interested. In fact, for those of you that I become the customer, and sometimes that's offensive, but it's more like get the hell away. I don't want you to manipulate me and make me buy the most expensive thing. And what do you think, I'm an idiot just because you put yellow in the column? And all the items are the same? And the only difference is the month. Like, why would I respond to this? Now, whoever wrote this is a good person trying to do a good job. I'm sure of that. And if I was sitting with them in a quick win intensive, I'd have my arm around their shoulder, or we'd be leaning in together, we'd be working and making notes and talking, and it would be very constructive. But I am not that person when I am the prospective customer or the consumer. I am another jaded victim, fed up, angry, in a hurry, and I have no time for your BS. That's the mindset you've got to take when you're looking at these. So we shift. And just by shifting that, we see a 36% increase in paid subscriptions. We're not talking click-through, we're talking money, recurring residual revenue. What a powerful improvement. And beneath this is not just the fact that we were more effective in our communication. We were more honest. Let's look at another example. Those are all links. This is for a university. They want you to inquire. They want you to become a prospective student. And so you move from this to 3 buttons instead of all that confusing set of links that I'm not sure if they are links, if they're not links. Why do they have bullets beside them, and why are some blue and the other are not blue? Does that mean this side's links? And nobody's thinking about that. They're just looking at the cute little color combinations and not understanding that all of this is having an impact on the mind with unintended consequences. So you got 3 buttons. They say the same thing, but they basically focus you in the area, and they tell you what you're going to find out. You'll see there's a blank where we protected the name of the school, but other than that, it's straightforward. Is that a great page? No. Could you improve the page dramatically? Could you improve the page that won dramatically? But still, who in this event with me right now wouldn't appreciate to see a 177% increase clicking through into the programs? The goal of the home page is to get a click or a key landing page. You don't make any money until they click through. I don't even try to fix ultimate conversion all at once. I move 1 micro yes at a time till I get them in the zone. So from this to this, can somebody see the difference? What's the difference between one page and the other? Simplified the calls to action. And what do we see as a result of that? 36.5% increase. Did you hear what the number is? Conversion. That should be a magic bell going off for you right now. That's revenue. All by simplifying. So adding contrast to the CTAs relative to the rest of the page, this is another way to treat this. In the other examples, we reduced the number of CTAs. Now we're going to add contrast. So here's an example of that. And look at the difference. The one on the bottom produces 2,793% increase in alerts. What does that mean? Well, that's fantastic for this person trying to get engagement. This is a financial services organization, and that's a huge gain for them. From this to this, moving the CTA into the main iPath, out of the side and right where it belongs. And I think I know who this is. You guys are all familiar with the kettlebell. Many of you probably are. They're in all your gyms. The guy who made that famous in the U.S., a guy named Pavlov, this is from the store of his partner. And you can see a 16% increase in conversions. So the marketer must engage the prospect in a mental dialogue. It's not a monologue, it's a dialogue. And guide each step, minimizing all the friction. The marketer makes meaning. Then the prospect makes decisions. When you ask the marketer to make the decision, you're manipulating. When you ask the prospect to make the meaning, you're putting too much work on their shoulders. We will help you, if we've done our job right, arrive at meaning, and that meaning will translate from meaning into perceived value. And that perceived value enables you to move the conversion fulcrum in favor of a yes, and that transforms your financial results. I'm out of time for today. When I come back in the next session, we're going to move right to the fourth sort of dangerous cognitive condition, elemental paralysis. I'll break it down, explain it to you, show you how to apply it. In the meantime, if you enjoyed today, would you subscribe and share and hit the like button so that we can continue to build a community of marketers? I honestly don't care how big the community gets. I don't put a lot of value in big numbers. I want real people who I can truly relate to. And if I have the right number of those people, I'm good. But we certainly would like your help in building the community. So thank you, and we'll be back with more.